Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on whatever app you are watching this podcast on. Today, I'm super excited. We have a very cool guest. Justin Hasard Lee is a major in the Air Force Reserves. He's a former F-16 pilot and current F-35 Lightning II instructor at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. And in his civilian world, when he's not flying fighter jets, he's an author, a speaker, and content creator. And amazingly enough, he has over 50 million views on his YouTube channel, which is Hasard Lee, Hazard with an S. So, Hazard, thanks for coming on the podcast today. This is awesome.
Hey, Terry, thanks for having me on.
And thanks for inviting me to the F-35 graduation. I got to go out to Luke Air Force Base a few weeks ago, and that was an incredible experience. It was really cool.
Yeah, it was great to show you the F-35, and I know the students who you're there for had a great time hearing your stories.
Yeah, I was really amazed. I spent a lot of time at Luke 30 years ago, when I was a new pilot at Williams Air Force Base and became an F-16 pilot. I had to go to Block 40 school, some F-16 training there several times. I flew the Eagle there, and it was like going back in time. And you hear all this like doom and gloom, and there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, and the country has a lot of challenges. But meeting those young men and women, it gives me hope. I mean, we got some good young people out there. I mean, those
Yeah,
F-35 students were pretty impressive.
yeah, there's amazing talent, and I mean those students they've grown up with iPads and F-35. It's like working a big iPad,
Right.
and so they are far better than they're going to be far better than I was coming from the F-16 to the F-35. It's probably a similar experience to going to the Viper, first electric
Yeah.
jet. So I'm sure you had some
Yeah.
old, crusty former F4 pilots
F4
flying
guys
that.
smoking a lucky to the merge. Yeah.
Yeah, the ashtray in there.
Yep. This and the SpaceX capsule is just basically an iPad. I mean, there's nothing to do. You literally sit there, and then there's launch, and you're shaking, and then a day later you feel a thunk, and you're docked to the ISS.
I mean,
Um,
there's still a lot to do in the F-35. So a lot of
yeah,
times people ask, which one are you busier in? And it's the same because the F-35 has a huge impact on the battlefield. So we try to teach those young students how to maximize their weapon system, even though the F-35 is doing a lot of the processing, especially with the information. It allows the pilots to be kind of, we call them functional seed, team leads, where they're in charge of 20 aircraft out there.
the I think the real, I guess, the promise of computers is that humans can get information and not just data. Like the space shuttle gave you a mountain of data, of just numbers of data. Early F-16s were just data, and the human was the processor. But in the F-35, and by the way, okay, F-35. So my first shuttle flight was 10 years ago, and afterwards, I remember I talked to Al Norman, the chief Lockheed test pilot, and I was thinking about going back and being a Lockheed company F-35 pilot. They had him at Pax River and here in Lockheed in Fort Worth and out at Edwards. And I really thought long and hard about it because it's such a cool airplane. But I'd only flown once, and I just decided I wanted to go fly in space again. So I kind of shut that door. But so I didn't really know that much about the F-35, and it gets a lot of bad press. I mean, it's not like everybody's favorite. It's not like the Pledge of Allegiance or apple pie or something. People. Well, nowadays people don't even like the Pledge of Allegiance, but you know what I'm
Yeah, it's
saying. There's a lot of bad
controversial.
press. And
There
after
is.
the tour that you gave me, like not only did I have faith in the youth of America, I had faith in the F-35. What an amazing airplane.
It is, and it's new technology, so they are doing a lot of that information fusion. So, like flying the F-16, as it's 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s technology all layered on top of each other.
Right.
Sensors everywhere that all attach to their individual screens, and it's the pilot's brain that fuses all that information together. And in the F-16, we had six times the CFIT controlled flight to terrain of other jets. Some due to G locking, passing out while we're pulling Gs, but some of it was just managing all those sensors, and the pilot misprioritized and ran into a mountain. And so it was difficult. The best way I can explain it to viewers is or listeners is, it's like having your web browser open with 11 tabs, and you're just cycling through those tabs while you're on the highway driving, trying to find that information that you want. In the F-35, it fuses all that data together. So it's just a red dot if it's a bad guy, green dot if it's a good guy. So it makes it a lot easier on us. And it's new technology. It took a while to get spun up, but 2018 was really the inflection point where it took off, and it's a far superior fighter than the Viper.
Well, Luke Air Force Base is probably the world's second most powerful Air Force behind America. I mean, there's
Yeah,
160, 170, there's 100 F-35s and
yeah.
another 60 or 70 F-16s. I don't think anybody on Earth has that many modern fighters.
I
I
think
mean,
from
maybe the
a
UK,
fighter
but I don't think
perspective,
so.
I think we're the sixth biggest Air Force in the world. But I mean,
But fifth
we have
gen, how many
F-35s.
F-35s? Yeah.
Yeah, F-35s, 100 of them. So that's more than the rest of the world's fifth gen fighters combined. So from a strength standpoint,
Yeah.
that's probably the top one or two.
The only Air Force more powerful than Luke Air Force Base is America, the rest of
Yeah.
America. Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive to see
Yeah.
because in 20, when did I see the F-35 the first time? I think it was 2015. I showed up to a red flag. And back then, you just heard of these things, and I taxied by, and there were two of these things with their canopy going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Um, and, the pilots had these like black Darth Vader helmets on, and it was just kind of mind blowing. And we did some exercises with these guys, and the F-35s went in, they killed everything. And that really was the reason why I switched over from the F-16, which, F-16 is still my favorite fighter.
Yeah.
It's the one I grew up wanting to fly. So it's my favorite fighter, but the F-35 is a much more capable
Is the
fighter.
best. Yeah, I agree. The F-16 is the the best pilot's airplane, but the F-35 is the one you want to go to war in. Is
Yeah.
high threat war.
The
You'd rather be
F-16
in. Yeah.
stripped down hot rod, John Boyd
Yeah.
back there, with his book,
Right.
stripping everything down, no ladder. Everything is designed to just do BFM dog fighting out there. So it's a fun aircraft to fly. But even the F-16, we put all kinds of different bells and whistles on it. It's
Right.
a lot heavier now.
Right.
So we kind of fly the F-16, at least Block 50s, like fifth-gen fighters. So it's a lot more you're a systems operator trying to employ valid weapons and trying to, have information dominance over the battle space.
Um, the you've touched about 18 different stories I want to talk about. You talked about F-16s and CFIT, controlled flight in a train, and that's when a pilot hits the ground in a perfectly good airplane. Often it's the pilot's fault, he gets distracted or whatever. And I was at Luke Air Force Base and I was learning how to do Lantern. Lantern's an old system from the 90s, where really from the 80s, where you could fly a jet, an F-16 or an F-15E, a Strike Eagle, low altitude at night. And it was designed to go in, it was designed to fight the Soviets in Central Europe. And in the early 90s, we were still using it. So I get checked out, and there's one rule they have. When you're going to attack the target, you take it. Normally, the autopilot flies the airplane really low, and you're just along for the ride. But to do the attack, you had to fly manually. So you had to push the button, come off of autopilot, and now you're flying. And they said, as soon as you come off, as soon as you start to fly, you stop looking at the targeting pod, which is the thing that's going to drop the laser guided bomb, and you just look out the window through this little soda straw infrared view and fly. So I go through this months and months long process. We had lost a pilot. Unfortunately, he died because he got fixated on the targeting pod and he flew the jet into the ground. My very first time I'm doing this solo without anybody in the back seat. I get to the IP to target run 10 miles out. I take over to fly manually. And the first thing I did was look down at the targeting pod. I just spent months being trained not to do that. And it's exactly what I started to do. And a few seconds later, I heard Betty, bitchin' Betty's the lady in the cockpit that yells at you and tells you what to do. Pull up, pull up. And my head was between my knees. And there was a hill between the IP and target. And I was literally flying right into that hill. And the computer pulled up to save me. So that was
Jeez.
like the ultimate stupid thing to do. I knew I shouldn't do it, and I did it anyway. And if it wasn't for the computer, I wouldn't have been saved. And the other thing I really want to talk about is auto GCAS. If I hadn't been like this, I wouldn't have been saved because the radar pod we had was on the bottom. If you were like this, the radar wouldn't have seen the ground, and I would have hit the ground. we have a new system. Years later, I'm at Edwards Air Force Base flying, and as a test pilot, we have this thing called Auto GCAS, Automatic Ground Collision Avoidance System, in the year 2000. And I went out and flew it. And the bottom line is, the theory is they use data from STS-99, a space shuttle mission, that mapped the Earth with very accurate elevation. So they figured, well, the airplane knows where it is, and you know where the ground is below you. And so the computer just figures out, hey, if you're going to fly yourself into the ground, I'll take over and I'll fly it away. And there was a lot of resistance from the patch wearers. They're like, I don't want the jet computer flying my jet. What if I'm in combat? What if I need to do this? Well, the bottom line is we don't ever lose fighters in combat from enemy action anymore. We lose it from people flying themselves into the ground. So the Air Force didn't fund this system for a decade, and we lost 19 more F-16s. And finally, in 2010, I think they started putting money into it. And thank God the F-35 has it. There was a really famous YouTube video maybe 5 years ago or something where a F-16 guy in Tucson was out on a training sortie, and the instructor's yelling, pull up. And the pilot had put himself to sleep. He pulled so many G's, the blood came out of his head and he fell asleep. And the airplane was going into the ground, and all of a sudden, vroom, it recovered and came up. And I think that was like the first big, well-known save. So that's a long story for me talking, but your thoughts on
Auto
GCAS?
GCAS is an incredible system. So I was uh, at Shaw Air Force Base flying F-16 Block 50s when that came out, and there was resistance. People were like, I don't know, there's some edge cases where this thing doesn't work, but I think it's proved itself in the 6 or 7 years that we've had it. We've
Right.
had 9 saves, 10 people's lives have been saved. One was a D model, and the footage is amazing. Like these people, I don't think people understand flying a fighter, just what 9 G's feels like. So I weigh about 200 pounds, 230
Right.
with my gear on. That's over 2,000 pounds of force if you put a scale under my butt, just squeezing me down. It's painful on the body, but mostly it's the blood being pulled out of your brain into
Yes.
your extremities. And if you pass out, you're going to be incapacitated for about 30 seconds. It takes about 20 seconds at the speeds we fly to impact the ground.
Right.
And so the footage is incredible. These people pass out, they're in full afterburner, just 45 degrees nose low. They're ticking through supersonic speeds.
Right.
And then Auto GCAS will take over. I mean, it's only supposed to do like a 5G recovery, but a few of the ones that I've seen, it's been 8, 9Gs recovering these pilots. And it's saved 10 people's lives. We have it in the F-35. So amazing system. And it's unfortunate that we had the technology 20 years ago to be able to put in, and we didn't do it.
We didn't put it in the F-22 either. I don't know if it's in now, but years ago, they were like, no, it's too expensive. And then I know we've lost at least 2 F-22s to controlled flight into terrain, one at Edwards and one up in Alaska. So yeah, it's a great system. Hopefully all future fighters, I wish airliners would have it. There's not a lot of airliner controlled flight into terrain, but there are some, especially in non-American airlines. Sometimes pilots mess up, and it's a technology that can save lives. So I thought that was pretty cool.
And it seems like it's fully developed. So I think, what was it, the South Korean flight that crashed at SFO? Went too low. So
Yep.
I think the planes themselves definitely have the technology. They can land by themselves with their ILS, at least some of them. So they definitely should put it in.
Right. Um, you talked about the helmet. So I went down to your life support room, and I've got my old NASA helmet there. I don't know how much.
The 55P.
Yeah, the basic helmet. No, the Air Force has a lightweight version. This is like the 80s Air Force, when they used to have the integral
Oh
visors.
yeah.
So the new ones are a lot lighter, because at 9Gs, I had a pretty strong neck, there's probably a neck machine in every fighter squadron in the Air Force. So the we're not pulling 9Gs in a T-38, so they gave us the old man helmets. But these F-35 helmets are incredible. I couldn't. The commander was down there, the Panther commander. By the way, I don't know if you can see the award. They gave me a 3D printed Panther award.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, so I've got it here, and
Proud.
it's hard to see because it's black. And anyway, he gives me his helmet, and I'm like, dude, that's not. He's like, no, try it. So I'm like, it gets down to about right there. I have a gigantic head. When I flew with the Russians into space, they had measured everybody's every dimension ever since Yuri Gagarin to custom make your spacesuit. And they were like, dude, this is the biggest head we've ever seen. I couldn't. When you see pictures of me getting in spacesuits, a lot of times I have a giant bruise on my chin, and it's just because, like, going through, and it literally bruises my chin getting in a rocket. So, anyway, tell me about that helmet because it's an incredible.
Yeah,
It's not your
the
father's
helmet
helmet.
is incredible. So it is made out of carbon fiber to make it a little bit lighter. It's still heavier than most helmets out there.
Yeah,
And under the
there's
G's,
yeah, right. It's not like here, right?
yeah,
There's
the
weight out in
weight,
front.
is kind of weird how it's distributed in there. It's more bulky, but the reason for it is because everything is pumped into the helmet. It's true augmented reality, which is amazing. So everything in the F-35 is designed to be able to get that information to the pilot as quickly as possible. So when I look out the left wing or right wing, I can see my wingman out there, all the pertinent information about them. When I look straight ahead, I see diamonds over all the bad guys, pertinent information for them. So true augmented reality, I think that's, as a society, we're going to be moving towards that. In 10 years, you're not going to have a cell phone. You're going to be wearing glasses.
Right.
But it's pretty amazing. It's tied into the distributed aperture cameras. So at night, you can, look through your body, which is a pretty surreal experience. But yeah, the helmet is awesome. If you can see it, you can kill it.
And you could see, like, you can look through the airplane and see. Do you see just green? We call it green stuff, just
Mhm.
like little outlines of things, or do you actually see camera
It's filled
imagery?
in. It's filled in. It's yeah. It just is green. So everything's kind of a green hue, but things are filled in depending on how you're using it. But it's a pretty cool system, especially the augmented reality portion of it. We don't have a heads-up display in the F-35, so we save that weight.
Right.
And just like anything with F-35, it's a forward leap in technology, so it took a while to iron out all the bugs. These are
Right.
Gen 3 helmets now that are pretty good. So again, everything started kind of clicking in 2018 with the F-35 because they
Right.
did something called concurrency, where they're building test versions and just they're cranking it out. They haven't figured it out, the design, like F-22 or F-15 or F-16. They build a test fleet of about 10 of these things, fly the wings off, figure out all the lessons learned, and then start manufacturing it. F-35, they just started cranking them out to collapse the timeline and to get more data, to be able to fix it. So it kind of made it seem like early on the F-35 wasn't going to be that good, but it was really gathering data to be able to improve the later versions. In 2018, we really turned the corner with the jet and the helmet.
Right. So the helmet's kind of like having a gaming machine on your head. I mean, it's not just there's a lot of computing power in that thing. Day and night,
Yeah,
it works. In the old days, you had to have the NVGs that you pop down.
yeah, yeah, and that was a pain when I was deployed to Afghanistan. So in the F-16, we have something similar called a JHIMX.
Right.
This is the JHIMX on steroids, but we'd have limited augmented reality capability with the JHIMX, and we were flying about 6 hour missions in Afghanistan, and I was on the evening bowl, so I would have to go out with a HIMX, and then while you're flying, you'd have to rip that thing off and then put on your night vision goggle bracket and then fly
Right.
with that, which was pretty difficult. But yeah, everything's built into this helmet, so you just take it and you go. It has a night vision camera in there. It has that link to the distributed aperture system as well. So it's a pretty good helmet, and
So
it costs accordingly.
it was a six-figure price tag.
Yeah.
JHEMIX is a joint helmet-mounted queuing system, and that was like the original. If you're flying the F-16, tell me if I'm speaking right, but you could look over here, see the bad guy, lock him up, and shoot. And in the old days, you'd have to point. And you
Mhm.
mentioned HUD, the heads-up display, which is like a piece of glass right in front of you, so you can all the imagery is on that piece of glass, but you'd have to point the glass at them to see what's going
Yeah.
on. With the
Oh, and
helmet-mounted sight, you just look off bore
yeah,
sight.
it's so intuitive. So I was the
Yeah,
first B course to fly with a HIMX, and
right.
so
Oh
ACM, air
wow, in
combat
the B
maneuvering,
course.
is in the B course out here at Luke in 2011. And so we were doing ACM, air combat maneuvering,
Right,
where it's two of you versus one or two other fighters.
right.
And it can be difficult difficult trying to discern who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, being able
Yeah.
to lock up the bad guy and be able to kill them. And with the hammocks, you just look at it, you shoot it, and it was too easy. So they had to go back and change all the rules to make it a little bit more difficult for us.
AIM-9 Papas. So AIM-9 is the close-in air-to-air missile that most Air Force fighters use. It's an infrared, so it looks for the heat of the bad guy. And we had, AIM-9 Mikes, which, it was an off-bore sight. It was a pretty good 80s, 90s kind of missile. But you had AIM-9 X's, is that right? Is that
We had
the
a few
new?
of them. So yeah, we flew with Lima mics, and then also we had just a few 9Xs that we were able to use.
And what is that? What does the AIM-9X let you do? By the way, you're active Air Force, so I'm going to try and get as much secret information out of you as I can, and I know you're
I'll
not
do
going
my
to give
best to avoid that. It's just a much better missile. So the AIM-9 history goes back, I think, to the 50s. And if you look at the
Yeah,
lineage of that thing, it's like ancestry.com. Like you have like back in the 50s, then you have the Bravo, Charlie, and it goes down. So we're in the great grandchild of the
right.
original
Steve Ritchie was
AIM-9
shooting down
Alpha.
MiGs over Hanoi with
Yeah,
AIM-9s. Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, the 9X is just improved in every way. So they always go through, tweak some things,
right.
and you can tie it to your helmet, and it's a great missile for within visual range fighting.
So does the F-35 use those missiles?
We
Talk
can
about the weapons that the F-35
we
normally
can
has and can have.
yeah. So yeah, we can throw AIM-9s on there. We can throw AIM-120s. We can throw GBU-31s, which are 2,000-pound GPS guided bomb. You can put GBU-12s, which those things were developed, I think, around Vietnam era time. So it's interesting to see a third gen weapon with a fifth gen aircraft.
Fighter.
So we can.
But it's a great bomb, though.
It's a pretty good bomb. Yeah,
I mean, if
pretty
you
good.
for laser guided bombs, you can carry a lot of them, and
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, when we were in Afghanistan, we were carrying GBU-54s, which were combined GPS and laser bombs.
oh,
And
okay,
those things were nail drivers. They were awesome. You could use them in either setting. We also had laser guided rockets when we were downrange. But yeah,
downrange
the A
meaning
model,
Afghanistan.
yeah, yeah. And then the A model in that 35 has a gun as well. So we have a 25 millimeter gun, carry 8 rounds or uh, 181 rounds of
Right,
25 mic, which it spins up to about 4,000 RPM. So that's about 3 seconds of gun with the spin
right.
up and cool down.
But it's a bigger. We flew 20 millimeter before, and this is 25, so a little bit bigger bullet.
Mhm.
You mentioned AIM-120. What's an AIM-120?
AIM-120 is a active radar guided missile.
So a little bit longer range than the AIM-9.
Yeah, advanced medium range air to air missile.
So it has its own radar on the missile itself. So
Yeah,
the
so
airplane
old
has a radar.
school.
Right,
Yeah, like Vietnam era, they're using semi-active radar where you're illuminating the bad guy and it's
right,
homing in on that. But here, the missile itself has a radar seeker in it.
right. Um, and so a typical F-35. By the way, you said A model, so I want to talk about A, B, and C model. But a typical F-35. I guess you can't say typical. It depends. If you're going to fight a modern IADS, integrated air defense system, you're going to have one. Well, you're not. Everything's going to be internal, right, for low observability. Because the F-35 has huge bay. I mean, you can put a lot of stuff internal to the airplane.
Yeah, you can. So it's designed for internal, external as well. So when we throw things on the rails, on the wings, we call it beast mode. So it's pretty cool to be able to see the jet with, let's see, two GBU-12s on each wing, and then you're carrying GBU-12s as well. So the jet itself can carry a lot of weapons. So it just depends if you want to go with the internal configuration, external configuration. But yeah, it's pretty cool to see it with all the weapons on there.
And you can, so a typical like day one of World War III would be two 2,000 pound bombs. They could be laser guided or GPS guided, I guess, or dumb. I doubt if you'd ever do that, but you could. And two AMRAAMs, is that right? Internal
It just depends. It depends on the situation. So we
situation,
can
right?
it's designed to be able to be able to adapt to whatever needs
Whatever you need.
you need.
Right. How about the engine? Like the F-16, I think I told you this. My first flight ever in an F-16 was with what's called a 129 engine. Was this at the time, this developmental experimental General Electric, and it had the most thrust ever, I think, of any fighter. And it was in a Block 30, which is a pretty light F-16. So it was like the highest thrust level with the lightest airplane. And that was my first ride ever in an F-16. So it was only downhill after that. But the F-16, I mean, clean, which of course is not combat. You're not going to go into combat with just a gun. But God, that thing could turn forever. You know,
Mhm.
it was an amazing airplane. Plus the canopy, it didn't have a bow. The F-35 has
Yeah,
a
you know,
bow.
that's I have some heartburn because of that. I
Yeah,
think that's because of the Marine model, but yeah, you know, the F-35 engine. I think the Pratt and Whitney F-135 engine, greatest fighter engine ever made. So it produces a lot of thrust. Now the F-35 is a little bit of a huskier jet,
right.
still very maneuverable. If you go on YouTube, you can type in F-35 demo team. They're doing all kinds of different profiles on there. They can do what's called a pedal turn, where it's pretty much, you know, in Top Gun, flat spin out to sea. You're intentionally doing that so you can employ your weapons like that. So I had a chance to go to the Lockheed factory and talk to Santi Bolness, who started off his career designing the F-16 flight control system and then moved to the F-35, and then he became the chief engineer of the F-35. And he was talking about how the F-35 is always running a continuous model of how it's flying through the air, and it adapts its flight control surfaces to that model. So the pilot can put in a stick input, and then the jet is going to figure out the best way to do it. And I
Right.
don't know if you had this problem since, you know, you were a super pilot that went on to become, you know, an astronaut. But the F-16, man, it was easy to land, very difficult to land smoothly. You're always banging that thing on.
Yeah. It's a
And
hard
that's because,
airplane to land.
yeah, there's a little bit of pilot induced oscillation because the flight
Yeah.
control software wasn't that quick. But the F-35, much, much faster, much easier to land smoothly.
Well, I can tell you the F-16, the Eagle is the easiest airplane to land. That thing, you just barely pull back. Well, the Hornet's the easiest because you don't do anything. You just
Yeah,
fly it
just
into
bang
the
it on.
runway. Both of I've flown both of those, but the F-16, how many guys did you know named Sparky in the F-16? I knew a few.
Maybe one.
Yeah, and that's because on landing, our speed brakes are way in the back, and if you got the nose up too high, you'd scrape your speed brake and make sparks, and you get a
Or
new
the
call
tail
sign.
feathers on the engine. Saw
That
quite a few
that's
people do
bad.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. You
that
had, I think it was
that is
15
bad.
degrees nose high. Anything
Yeah,
more than that, you got the tone and you could
above
start
15, you're
scraping
going to
feathers.
hit exactly.
Yeah.
So the F-16 was originally designed to land at 13 alpha, which is pretty nose high, and you can land it pretty well at 13. But all of a sudden, everybody started getting the Sparky call sign, so they bumped it back down to 11. So we landed a little bit faster, a little bit more nose low. But the flight control system goes from it transitions from a rate command to a G command right around then. And by 13, it's fully transitioned to G command, which is like a Cessna 172. It's like a normal airplane. So it's normal to land. But at 11, it's still in this transition mode. So the reason why every people don't struggle landing it, you can land it, but it's not always the prettiest, is because of the flight control. If you ever talk to that guy again, ask him the story about it. But
Yeah.
that's some
Yeah.
serious airplane geek stuff. But
Well, I mean,
that's
flight
why.
control, that's a software that has to be right pretty much from day one. I don't know if you've seen that F-22 video where there's some issue with going from mill power to afterburner tied into
Yeah.
the flight control system. The pilot got into pilot induced oscillation and then ended up crashing it onto the runway and went skidding down the runway with sparks.
Yeah, I think that was like early 90s, maybe. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
F-35 landing, it was really interesting hearing you guys talk about it in the Panthers. Talk about that. The airplane does not land like an F-16, I don't think.
Let's see. It pretty much lands like an F-16. It's easy though. We have speed hold,
Yeah, that's what
AOA
I mean. You
hold.
have
So
those
you don't pretty
hold.
much don't have to do anything.
How,
You
that's what I
know,
mean. How does that
there's
work?
so much system management in the F-35 that I always land it just manually because I think you need a little bit of you know, pilotage, you know, on every
Yeah.
flight. And especially as a reservist, I don't fly quite as much as the active duty guys, maybe once or twice a week. So I do everything I can to try and keep my skills as sharp as possible. But yeah, you can just do, um, 11 AOA approach, it holds that all the way to landing. And in fact, they're on the Navy, they're having trouble with the F-35 wearing out the anti-skid because it lands in the exact same point every time.
Wow. So the runway is getting worn out.
Yeah, yep. Because with their, I don't know what system it is, whatever they use to land,
Right.
it's so precise now that it hits the same point, the same wire every time.
That's funny. If you're a pilot, like on the approach end of a runway, it's like a bell curve distribution. There's a lot of black, the rubber deposits 1,000 feet down, and there's a little bit short of that, and there's a little bit long of that. It's kind of a thing, but the F-35 is going to be just a dot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Air Force version, we're hand landing that thing.
Right.
So there is still that distribution, but in the F-16 at least, yeah, there'd be guys, especially with I guess the leading edge flaps moving around, they sometimes land a little bit short. So the F-35 definitely easier to land, and we have much bigger brakes. So the F-16 it was all about landing on speed perfectly because you had little tiny Toyota Corolla brakes on there.
Right.
Especially if you were like when we were in Afghanistan, Bagram Air Base, 5,000 feet high, would be carrying back potentially extra fuel, extra weapons, 2,000-pound bombs. So that was a place where it was easy to land long in that high density altitude and then end up having to take a cable at the end of the runway.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff I want to talk about. The systems, and you mentioned this earlier, but we were hearing about the electronic warfare capabilities. To a certain extent, the F-35 is as much of a intelligence gatherer as it is a weapon. There's lots of different things that it can do with sensors. What can you talk about that that you can talk about?
Yeah, it's just the next kind of generation of thinking for a fighter. So information dominance, being able to deny that to the enemy. So the F-35 really is great because it's stealth. It's very difficult to see on radar. It has great sensors just baked into it. And both of these things, it really has to be baked into, with stealth technology, you can't just kind of sprinkle some stealth dust on a plane and make it stealthy. So it really has to be baked in from the beginning. You also have to have great sensors baked in if you want it to be stealthy. And then you have to fuse all that data together. It has like 8 million lines of code to be able to fuse all that information together. It also networks extremely well with other fighters. So, it'd be nice if we all had 5th gen fighters, F-22s, F-35s, and we were good to go. But those 4th gen fighters built in the 70s, really the 80s and 90s, because they're upgraded. But those planes are going to be around till at least the late 2040s. And so we need to work together as a team. And so in F-35, we can help them with their situational awareness. If it's a really particularly dangerous threat, we can go in and kill it. Otherwise, we can save our ordnance, save our fuel, and utilize their weapons to be able to take out those threats so that we can stay on station for a longer period of time. And so, the situational awareness, the networking ability, those are things that are not sexy to someone going to an air show. So it's very difficult to be able to explain some of this stuff to a casual aviation fan because they want to see, loud jets. They want to see jets turning quickly. They can understand top speed, things like that. But it's difficult because we can't show like how well the F-35 networks with the other aircraft, and B, at air show, you'd pretty much just be popping some of the panels and showing the computer.
Right. No, the F-35 is still supersonic, 9G. It can still turn and burn, although it doesn't have thrust vectoring, right?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, like the F-22. I mean, the F-22 is probably the king of the hill when it comes to thrust to weight ratio and thrust vectoring and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But that's not
aerodynamically,
modern,
that thing's incredible.
right? But for the audience, I mean, you just can't overemphasize how important and how difficult 8 million lines of code is a serious computer engineering project to get them to work, all the time.
And it's a systems problem. If you're putting on thrust vectoring, now you're adding on weight. So, I sympathize with people like Santi Bolnis because their marching orders were, hey, design a supersonic stealth fighter, most situational awareness ever made, um, and also make it hover. So it was an extremely
Right.
difficult
Right.
engineering challenge. So they had to like fit all these pieces around, and they wanted, part commonality. So it was a difficult engineering challenge, but I think they did an incredible job. And
Yeah.
F-35 is much more capable than fourth gen fighters, as it should be. It's 40 years newer.
Right. Um, but that the code, if it works 99% of the time, and 1% of the time the flight controls froze up or something, Luke would lose an F-35 a day. Like it has to work 99.9999999% of the time.
Yeah, in some aspects you can kind of see what happens, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely flight controls are one of those things that it has to work from the very beginning.
And the F-16 had some of those sensors, but they all required bolting on. So, for example, I did HTS, Harm Targeting System, which was a way to find enemy radars. It's called Wild Weasel. I did the Wild Weasel mission, but you had to bolt on a something that listened for radar signals. I did the infrared night attack mode and the targeting pod to find the targets to drop laser guided bombs on. But we had to bolt on these big, heavy, not aerodynamic, not stealthy pods. They got improvements to the radar where they could have data link and figure out if they were good guys or bad guys, but they had to bolt on a bunch of external things. So all those things that you could have them, but it wasn't integrated. You had to look at two different screens and you had to bolt stuff on. It's all internal.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean that's amazing.
yeah. I saw an old 1990s RCA advertisement the other day, and it had like it was highlighting a sale on a fax machine, on a phone, on a TV, on a radio.
Right.
It was essentially just a phone. So like you had like 10 different items for your office that's
Right.
all been made up by a phone now. So that's essentially what the
This is the
F-35 is.
F-35.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's the picture you got on there?
That's from so I did a project called One More Orbit. It's an F-104.
Nice.
We took off and landed from the Kennedy Space Center, and we set a world record flying around the Earth over the North and South Pole. And I got to direct a movie. The movie is called One More Orbit. So it was like my first director experience, which was awesome. I loved it. But the Gulf, we were in a G650. That Gulfstream is so fast. We wanted a chase airplane to get the footage, and they've got a small squadron of F-104s at the Kennedy Space Center. So we hired those guys. They're former fighter pilots, a Navy guy and an old Italian Frecce Tricolore pilot. So they got to chase us. It was awesome. It was really cool. So that's my
That is
home
cool.
screen.
So where did they take off from?
KSC, the Kennedy Space Center, on the
They have a
shuttle.
couple F-104s there
Yeah,
just for test.
yeah. You can if you have a sensor pod that you want tested, or you've got a new rocket and you want to see what if the whatever works at Mach 2, or yeah, if it's basically a flight test
And you
squadron.
can just hire them.
Yep. You
How
can
much
even
do those cost?
you'd have to talk to them. I mean, it's like, I don't know, 10 or 20 grand an hour. I don't know what the number is, but it's something like that.
Burn fuel quick.
It's more than I have, but it's not $1 million or anything, that
Yeah.
you can lease them out. There's definitely
I'd
a
love to
market.
fly an F-104. We have a static one here at Luke, but I mean
Yeah.
that thing is just pretty crazy, like how small those wings are, how big
It,
that engine is.
it's a flying engine. I like the joke. I got a lot of F-104 time in my gun camera because we used to fight the Italians at Duchy Mamanu when I was at Spangdahlem. And, we go out and do BFM with F-104s. I mean, it's not really much of BFM. Their only goal was to go fast and just try and, blow
Yeah,
through the merge.
not too much returning.
The wing is the size of the desk I've got here that my computer's sitting on. But it's a cool airplane. It's a super cool airplane. A couple of our guys on the mission actually hired them, and they went up for they paid for a ride in an F-104. They have two seaters. So they went up and went supersonic and pulled G's and stuff. So it
Yeah, I'd
was
love to do
it was a
that. I think
blast.
those things landed almost like 190 knots, something
Yeah,
crazy like that.
they do. Yes. And so as we were coming down, at 190 knots, all of a sudden the black smoke starts coming out, and they had to go around. And as we land, if you watch the movie, at the end of the movie, we're landing, we're high fiving each other. Woo, we set the record. Boom. and the guy did a big 360 and kind of, did a flyby at 100 feet right over us. I thought the APU exploded or something. I thought, man, they blew the tires or something happened, and it was just the dude, doing Maverick, buzzing the tower.
Nice.
So back to the F-35. You mentioned that the thing has to hover. So talk about, like, why did they do that, and what did they do, and Air Force, Navy, Marines.
Yeah, so this is not my expertise here. So there are three variants. There's the A variant, which is one that I fly. That can pull 9Gs. It has the 25 millimeter gun. There's the C variant. That's the one that can land on a carrier, a little bit bigger wings, no gun, beefed up landing gear. And then there's the B variant, which is the Marine version. And so that can hover. So they take the fuel tank that's behind us in the A variant. They took that out. They put a lift fan on there. And so I'm not an engineer, but I heard that this was the one linchpin technology that they didn't have at the time, that they had to essentially just jump off the cliff and build a parachute on the way down, which was being able to tie that lift fan into the spinning jet engine. And so that's where it gets its power from. And so it can actually hover. It twists the nozzle of the jet down. It opens up that lift fan, and then it can hover and land, which is pretty incredible to see a jet that weighs about 30,000 pounds just hovering right there, right in front of you. And from what I hear from Brick Wilson, who's the head Lockheed test pilot, he was saying that it probably takes about 3 hours to learn how to hover in this jet. It's not like the Harrier. It's really intuitive. It uses ground tracking, and so it does most of the work for you, so that you can just pretty much push a button and it'll land for you.
Um, so yeah, the Harrier was the airplane it replaced. It was the British, 1969 circa original hovering jet that had four fans on the side that would rotate, which was probably a lot easier than having a giant jet engine that's not thrust vector 90 degrees down. So if this is the airplane, the engine in the back goes 90 degrees down, and then there's a fan here in the middle of the airplane, like you said, that has a fan. So there's two. Basically, you're holding an airplane on 2 points, which is pretty amazing. The roll axis has got to be
Mhm.
a little
Yeah,
unstable.
you couldn't do it without computers, but with
Yeah,
computers, it becomes really easy.
the way I remember it is A is Air Force, so the F-35A is Air Force. B is Beach, so the F-35B is the Marine version to hover, and C is Carrier, so that's the Navy
I
version.
like it. I might
ABC.
have to steal that.
Yeah,
Sometimes I forget to.
Air Force, Beach, and Carrier.
Yeah.
So, and in the 90s, I guess the DoD said, hey, we need a fifth generation fighter to replace F-16s and Hornets and Harriers and all these airplanes. So we either develop multiple programs or we make them all the same. And there's definitely different opinions. Was that a good idea or not? And I'm sure you fully support the Air Force's position on that issue, but there are different opinions.
Yeah.
Was it a good idea or not to do that?
Well, especially something as extreme as a aircraft that needs to hover. So the
Right.
requirements for that are a lot different than, hey, we're just going to take a fighter that can land on land and turn it into a fighter that can land on a carrier. So that's
Right.
relatively easy, but making it hover, that's really difficult. So yeah, there are varying opinions on that. I will say the benefit though is you can have similar avionics across all of them. And that
Right.
35 is an international program. So we have a lot of different partners, especially here at Luke. So Dutch, Danish, Norwegian, all kinds of different countries are flying this aircraft. So the benefit is you can, if you're doing a software update or any upgrade, amortize that over all the other fighters that you're going to make. So the F-22, we only have about 180 of them.
Right.
So if you're putting a lot of money into an avionics upgrade, it's just for 100 aircraft. But with the F-35, it's the U.S. alone is going to be buying 2,500 of these things. And
Right.
I think it's about the total buy is in the 3,000s.
Right. Yeah. So there's probably some good and some bad about it, but
Mhm.
it's an amazing airplane. I came away from that time in Luke. I told you, I said, man, these young kids are great. The F-35 is great, and I think our adversaries, and we know who it is, maybe they, but really one, they just don't want to mess with the F-35. It's a good airplane.
And the scale is incredible. Like, Luke having 100 of these things. When I was at the factory a couple months ago, I think they were building, and the factory is amazing. Like
Yeah.
have you had a chance to go there?
Years ago, I went there. I flew the sim, but it was still F-16 centric. So I haven't seen it
You
for
should check it
years.
out. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure you've seen the building over a
Yeah.
mile long, but they're building over 200 F-35 simultaneously there, and they're constantly upgrading it. Had a chance to interview Don Kynard, who designed the factory, and I mean, just so much is going on there. They have all kinds of new technology come in, robots that are because there are no rivets on the plane. So what they have to do is there are 60,000 like bolts on there, and they have to melt a piece of plastic. It's called hot dotting. Melt a piece of plastic on there and sand it down. And so their newest
Why is that?
robot does that itself for the low observability.
So if you have a bunch of bumps, metal bolts sticking out, that
Mhm.
reflects radar energy, and radars can see the airplane better.
Yeah, so it's nice and smooth on
Right.
the surface. But yeah, that factory is incredible. Just the 200 of these F-35s being built simultaneously, all the robots, all the people that are going into the factory. It's definitely a sight to see, and I think it's open to the public. I know with COVID, there's been some issues, but if you go to Lockheed's website, you can try and schedule a tour.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Mhm.
Can you imagine some of our adversaries letting the public go take a tour of the J-10 or J-20 or what, the Su-37 factory?
No, no. I mean, yeah, it's
Wow,
pretty
that's amazing.
pretty crazy. And yeah, to the point before, we have so many fiction fighters. Like it's one thing to be able to build some sort of exotic test
One off,
platform.
right?
It's
Like
another
the
to be
Russians,
able to
right?
scale that thing so that you're
Right.
building 200 of these things
Right.
at one time. And you only have like a limited amount of talent, so you need to have that top talent building that prototype,
Right.
and then being able to develop systems so that the next level talent can scale it all.
Let's talk about talent because if you're a young man or a young woman, or if you're a parent of a young man or young woman, America needs American citizen engineers, especially like Lockheed needs people who can get security clearances and work on these cool programs, and Boeing and General Dynamics, other lots. There's lots of need out there for American citizen engineer talents. We've been training lots of people from all around the world for decades now, but we need talent. That's a great. I like that point.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely need a lot of talent. I think colleges, they need to make money, so they're marketing things.
Right.
So they kind of market all degrees, but definitely some degrees are more useful than
Right.
others. And engineering, I think, is extremely valuable. I have a son. He's too young to learn, but I think he's definitely going to learn how to code, because I think that's the language of the future. You have to be able to learn how to code, because as we were talking before, one piece of code, you can scale it infinitely. So you can design one piece of code and it can help a million people out there.
When I was a project pilot at Edwards, I used to tell my engineers, it's only software. Come on, just basically I was a software tester is what I was doing as a test pilot. And I'm like, guys, it's only software. What's the problem? Can't you just make it work? Coding, if you can code. I had a couple folks on here. Guy had an amazing story. He was a Chinese Uyghur refugee, escaped from China after getting arrested. 2 years in Turkey as a UNHCR refugee, made it to America, working minimum wage. Finally started a company. Be, Somebody told him, "Hey, I'm making $90,000 doing coding," and he was like, "What? I'm making 20 grand at the mall." And he had a baby, and so he's just grown this coding training company to teach people. It's like 7 months full time. It's not a college degree, but you come out of there able to code. And the point is, that's a skill. If you're thinking about changing your career, or you got kids that don't know what they want to do, man, there's a lot of opportunity out there. I'm writing a foreword for a friend's book, and I just wrote it last night. And I was talking about how I had a TRS-80 and I taught myself BASIC, and back in the day. You don't even know what a TRS-80 is probably, but
No, I know what a TI-83 is.
it's the same era. The first computer was a Radio Shack TRS-80. It came out in like 1978 or something, and it was funny. It had 4 kilobytes of memory, but there was no hard drive, of course. I didn't even have a floppy disk. I didn't have anything. Eventually, I got a cassette. You could hook up a cassette drive to load, and you'd buy cassettes of software that you could load. But when I first got it, it didn't do anything. So I had to learn BASIC, and I learned how to make a square. And then I figured out how to make the square move across the screen, and I could make it change different colors. And I was in like sixth grade or something. I was probably 10 years old or maybe 12 or something. But anyway,
So you must have crushed computer science at the academy.
we had, oh my God, what was that called? It was like a fake language that we had to learn.
Yeah. Oh, what was that?
It wasn't, I'm thinking Billy Bean, but that's the Oakland A's general manager. Billy Burrows was the computer. This giant mainframe, you used to have to go and wait. Anyway, yeah, computers are important. If you got, you're looking for a new career, it's a good thing.
It's become pretty intuitive too. So I was kind of playing around with Apple's new language, Swift, and man, it is intuitive. Like they have all the functions. I don't have a computer programming background at all.
Right.
But it was pretty intuitive. Like
Right.
they have some pretty good software, something called Swift Playground, which is really designed for, I think, like middle school kids. And I
Right.
was teaching myself how to program on there a little bit, but it's super intuitive. So I think when my son, when his age, when he's like in his 20s, most people out there are going to be able to program. And these aren't hardcore languages like back in the day. It's pretty intuitive, but I think you're going to need to be able to do that if you want to have a great job in the future.
At the academy, it used to be Fortran, Formula Translator. Fortran was the technical computer language. I think a lot of the stuff in Air Force airplanes flying today was written in Fortran. And I was an astronautical engineer, and I stayed up one night trying to debug this Fortran program. I misspelled the word read, READ. I misspelled it, and I figured it out at 3 a.m. or something, and I was so mad. I went in the next day and canceled my engineering major and switched to math. So I ended up being an applied math major because I didn't want to be writing Fortran for the next. That's all the Astro guys. All they did was write programs that calculated orbits and stuff.
Yeah.
The new
Yeah.
languages are not that much torture.
Yeah, I don't think there's that machine language anymore. And I think, with AI, with augmented reality, with all these different things coming online, I think that's an amazing emerging field.
Yeah,
And something that we're taking advantage of with the Air Force. With we talked to
right.
the augmented reality helmet.
So I want to again back to the F-35 because that's pretty cool. Why do we need F-35s? So you talk about threats, and I don't know if you can talk about countries. F-16s have done pretty good over the last 20 years in Iraq. No, I'm sorry, 31 years. Unbelievable. But why do we need F-35s?
Well, threats have really increased quite a bit. And so a manned fighter really takes on the order of 20 years, $50 billion to be able to develop a manned fighter. So a surface to air missile takes a lot less to be able to build one of those. So surface to air missile technology has massively increased over the last 20, 30 years. And so it's a lot easier to be able to shoot down a fighter. Now, the last 20 years, we've been preoccupied with places like Afghanistan and Iraq, but those are wrapping up very rapidly. So probably in the next week, we'll be out of Afghanistan. We'll see
Right.
how that goes. And we're switching to great power competition with some of those other countries that are just as capable and lethal as us. And so if you have a 1970s aircraft going into these countries, because that's what America does, we force project. Fortunately, we don't have to, defend our borders that often from other aircraft attacking us. So if you're going to project into a country, you have to have the logistical resources to be able to make that happen. And you have to be able to take out those SAM sites. And for a fighter designed in the 70s, that's a tall order. So you're looking at
Right.
some high losses if you're trying to do that with old aircraft. And you can't really upgrade these old aircraft. Just imagine if you're racing a car and you're using a 1970s Corvette. It's an awesome car, but even if you got it and put in a
Yeah.
new engine, it's not going to be able to compete with the new C8.
Right. So obviously, Russia is the king of surface-to-air missiles, I think, and they make some pretty good missiles. And China often in the past has just made whatever Russia was making, but they're starting to make their own stuff now, right? Like the Chinese equipment is not just a copy of Russian equipment anymore necessarily.
Yeah, I think across the board, people are learning how to innovate and kind of push the rope with technology.
So how about the surface-to-air missiles was always at the front of my mind, and I think most fighter pilots, but the enemy fighters too. Modern Su-35. I remember I was fighting a MiG 29, East German MiG 29 in training. After the wall fell, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, kept some of the MiG 29s for a while. Finally, they got to be too expensive, but we got to go fight them. And we were across the circle, and the guy called me dead, and I was like, "Holy shit!" Because the Russian missiles were so good, they could do that, and the MiG 29's a 1986 airplane. These modern Su-35s, and I remember going to the Paris Air Show in the 90s with the canards and these giant engines. I mean, that's an impress. They make some pretty good fighters too. It's not just a surface-to-air missile.
They do, but I will say, being a fighter pilot is probably less than 10% PFM dogfighting now.
Right.
So it's really being a systems operator, being able to synthesize large amounts of information, being able to coordinate large formations of aircraft. So yeah, we don't do a lot of dogfighting. You still need to be able to know how to do that as a last resort. But
Right.
with our sensors, with the stealth, with the weapons, you're looking at mostly beyond visual range fighting.
Right. Yeah, and that's where the F-35. If our job was to guns only, turn and burn, man, those flankers are good airplanes. But
Yeah.
outside of 2 miles away, I'll take an F-35. I think any day.
And see, same with F-16. Like the F-16, amazing dogfighter.
It
But
is.
when I
Yeah.
was in Afghanistan, we put on so much stuff on there that we could barely keep up with the tanker. Like
Right.
when we were tanking, if I had a full loadout that I hadn't employed yet, I had to plug that thing into afterburner for a
Right.
second. And you don't have the ability to finesse the throttle when you're
Right.
in afterburner. So you just have to plug it in for a second, out, and then about a second and a half later, it would light off, push you forward, and then you would be in mill power as you started
Right.
drifting aft. So we just put on so much stuff
Right.
on the F-16 that John Boyd is probably spinning in his grave.
I remember the same thing flying over Iraq, and that was in the 90s. That was a lot, Mavericks and GBUs and HARMS was our big thing, and yeah, and gas tanks and electronic countermeasures pod. All that stuff's internal. I mean, literally internal in the F-35. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing when you tank, although you can go beast mode and you can put on tanks and missiles and bombs, but probably when you learn how to tank, you don't have to worry about that in the F-35.
No, you have a
Tanking
lot of
means you
thrust.
pull up, yeah, when you pull up underneath a refueling airplane
Yeah.
and do that. So, Afghanistan's been in the news a lot, and I know you don't want to, put on your foreign policy hat and start saying what we should be doing foreign policy, but you went there, and when you're there, you don't know if the janitor's going to come in and blow himself up in the dorm. You don't know if there's a guy off the end of the runway with a SA-14 that. So there's some level of stress with going into combat, even though that they don't. Even though we pretty much have air dominance, but there's memorials at Luke Air Force Base to guys, F-16 guys who've lost their lives.
Well,
So yeah, what do you
yeah. I
think?
mean, when I was in Afghanistan, about let's see, about a month and a half into my time there, it was Veterans Day. And so, when you're deployed, there's no weekends, very
Right.
few holidays. But this was one of the holidays that they allowed us to do a 5K run. And I wasn't at the run because I had just gotten done flying a mission. The run was scheduled at like 6:15 in the morning before the sun even rose. And so I was just going to sleep and I heard a pop sound, and that was across the base. So there was a Afghani who'd been working there for 5 years, and it's if you read the report, it's almost like an accident report with all the Swiss cheese holes aligning.
The
But
chain, right?
it was a suicide bomber that had walked up to the crowd of people that was getting ready for the run and detonating himself and killed 4 people, wounded 16. So yeah, you know, there's still the threat of something like that happening, mortars. So there's still threats out there.
Yeah, and so you know we've been in Afghanistan for 20 years now. Next month, really, we've been in Iraq. That we've been in combat. Guys have been getting combat pay in the Middle East for 31 years. 31 years ago this month, I was a pilot training student at Willie, and Saddam invaded Kuwait, and George H.W. Bush started Desert Shield. And 31 years later, I mean, there's guys who graduated from high school, went to the academy, served 20 years, and retired a while ago, and we're still there, right? And when the country collapsed in a week, it's clear we could have spent another 5 years there. That never would have changed, right? Like, we're never going to make Afghanistan into West Germany, and so I certainly don't fault the president for pulling out. What good is going longer? Could it have been done better? Yeah. If we would have announced, hey, we're pulling all Americans or we're evacuating completely, we would have been saying, hey, Taliban, come and take over, right? You don't want to do that necessarily. So I don't know how it could have been done better, but it certainly begs the question of, we more than decades in Vietnam, the enemy takes it over, over 3 decades in Iraq, and that happened, 2 decades in Afghanistan. So I hope that somehow we can learn our lesson and quit trying to go turn these countries into West Germany, when they're not ever going to be turned into West Germany. I don't know, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And I know you're limited what you can say.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between security and nation building, and you have to figure out what the balance is. So I think it goes back to mission planning. When we plan a mission, it's really the ends, the ways, the means, and the risks. So what's the end state that you want? What are the means? What do you have available? What are the tactics or techniques that you're going to use? And what risks are you willing to allow for that mission? And so I think we have to do it on a tactical level for missions that we fly. I think you have to do it as a country level. So how many resources are you going to devote to this? Is it worth it? And then what kind of risk are you taking on by doing that? And there's a big distinction between security and nation building. So,
Mm-hmm.
People a lot smarter than me, that's their job to figure that out. But I think you definitely have to have a really clearly defined end state, just like we do flying fighters. So after a mission, we have the objectives on the board, and you get a
Right.
plus or minus.
Right.
And then you're, you can see if you succeeded or if you didn't.
We need a national debriefing on this for sure, because they're saying $2.25 trillion, but that's not included. They're going to be paying you and me benefits for the rest of our lives and our families, and that number is just so humongous, and that's Afghanistan only.
Yeah.
So that we borrowed, our kids and our grandkids owe China trillions and trillions of dollars for Afghanistan. Now, we haven't been attacked in 20 years. So thank God, knock on wood, that worked. The fighting you did in Afghanistan helped keep America safe. So thank you. I mean, it wasn't like it was completely meaningless. It's been hard. If life as a terrorist has been pretty hard for the last 20 years. So, and a big part of that's because of what you did and the other million plus people who have been to Iraq and Afghanistan. But, anyway, there's a difference between nation building and security. And I remember on 9/12, I remember thinking, oh God, we shouldn't invade Afghanistan. We need like a special ops base. We need Bagram to be able to fly drones and F-16s. And, we need to have a presence there to make sure there's never a Osama bin Laden again, but we can't change that plate. The Brits tried in the 19th century, the Soviets tried in the 20th century, and we tried in the 21st century, and it's never going to work. So I think
I
that's the
mean,
lesson learned.
yeah, the Afghanis, they're a tough people. Like I can remember, like the thing that really stands out about Afghanistan are the mountains. Like if there weren't the Taliban there that was trying to kill you, it would be the best ski resort in the world.
Wow.
The mountains go up to 24,000 feet, I think is the highest one, like almost Everest
Right.
height level. And so you'll be flying at 20,000 feet and you'll be looking up at mountains. And so I remember flying back on a sortie once, and I was about 20,000 feet. I looked down into kind of a valley in between two mountains, and I saw a fire because I flew mostly at night. So I saw a
Right.
fire and I slewed my targeting pod to it. And it was almost at 15,000 feet. And there were people down there that were doing something. Um, and, to have a group of people that are at 15,000 feet, and, they're probably not out there just, mountain climbing for the sake of it. So they're just living there, or they were moving somewhere.
Right.
That's a tough group of people.
It looks like a beautiful place, but the thing that just bugs me more than anything is how the women are going to be treated, And I'll tell you this, from space, you can kind of tell where wealth is, not population, but how people are doing by city lights at night. You can't tell during the day, but at nighttime, North Korea is a black hole
Mm.
with a little white dot in Pyongyang. South Korea is just lights everywhere, thriving country. And I could see Kabul at night. And I remember thinking, I was in space and I was thinking, thank you, America. Like that, the reason why there's lights in Kabul is because of America. Like we're making people's lives better there in Afghanistan for some, to some extent. And it was interesting to see that. But those lives, especially for women, are about to go downhill. And
Yeah.
that's the worst. That's the worst part of the whole thing. And hopefully the Taliban does what they say and they're not going to be as evil as they were before, but, we're not going to have
Yeah.
much of a say in it.
Yeah, hopefully. And I heard Kabul was a pretty great place in the 70s. So, like,
Right.
before the Taliban took over and before the Soviets invaded. So, maybe someday it'll go back to that. But I do feel bad for some of them, at least, because I would
Yeah.
fly missions over the cities, and there's one mission where there was gunfire nonstop. So I don't know what the gunfire was for, because I was uh, doing something separate, but there was inner fighting nonstop. I was there for a couple hours, 2, 3 hours, and there wasn't one time where there wasn't fire.
You were just
Less
looking down at the
for 10
city.
seconds, just gunfire going off, AK-47, that kind of stuff. So, I can't imagine, families growing up there,
Yeah.
uh, that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
hopefully they, hopefully they can recover at some point and live a better life.
It's a brutal situation. I had a couple guys on the podcast that it's going to drop soon. Two Army vets from Afghanistan and Iraq, and they started an organization called Stop Soldier Suicide, which is kind of, I don't know, near and dear to my heart because I know there's a lot of guys struggling. I'm getting text messages from friends, because and I spent a lot of time at the Army hospital there in San Antonio and a little bit in Bethesda. These guys are coming back missing arms and legs or just mentally, that was a stressful time. And a lot of people are feeling bad. And I just want to get the message out like, thank you. America hasn't been attacked in 20 years. We did some good stuff for Afghanistan. So it wasn't like it was all, for naught. There was some good done. But man, there's a lot of people in America that are, pretty upset right now, to say the least. And not only America, but around the world. Or we have allies in Europe and Asia, Australia. A lot of people have helped this fight, and so I don't know. It's just kind of it's a rough time right now.
It is, especially for those guys that and girls that were on the ground. As a fighter pilot, you're a little bit insulated from that at 15,000 feet.
Yeah,
But
that's why
we
I
would
joined the Air
respond to a
Force.
lot of we respond to a lot of troops in contact
Right,
situations where they were being ambushed by, ISIS was starting to gain a hold
right,
in 2017 when I was there, or the
yeah,
Taliban, and they were taking a lot of fire, taking casualties. So it's those guys on the ground, they're really in kind of a different environment.
Yeah. Hats off to them. So, anyway, Hazard, this has been awesome. Thank you for talking. The F-35s are pretty incredible machine, and I know the listeners are going to be interested in it. I just need to get a ride in one.
I know that's the thing. They only have a single seat version, so there will never be a two-seat version of the F-35. So, which is pretty crazy. We have these people in their young early 20s coming to learn how to fly the aircraft. In some cases, they only have a few solos, and the very next flight, they're going to be, taking this $80 million aircraft and landing it themselves. So
Right.
It's pretty crazy. So yeah, come on down, join the Air Force again, and I'm sure you can
Single seat, single engine, man.
Yeah,
That's the only way to go.
that's the way to do it. I think two seat is third gen technology. We have all that automated now.
I love it. Anyway, all right. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the podcast. And again, if you like Down to Earth with Terry Virts, please subscribe and leave us some ratings. And reminder about your YouTube channel, Hasard Lee, Hazard with a S, on YouTube. It's incredible, amazing content. If you like airplanes and cool stuff like that, check it out. Over 50 million views so far. So thanks for coming on board,
Yep.
Hazard.
Hey, thanks, Terry.